Good evening. Good evening, my friends, my family who watch the show, colleagues, fellow creatives, anyone who's stumbling on this, scrolling through Facebook or LinkedIn tonight, the audience who listens to this 3 weeks from tonight on Radio Audio Only Encore Edition. Um, Hello. As you can tell, I'm not my usual gregarious, excited, um, animated self. I almost didn't do the show tonight since yesterday afternoon and the events that happen and the stories that I'm seeing people tell on social media and to each other and elsewhere, and the phone calls, texts, emails that I've gotten asking for my thoughts on what's going on. Today is an anniversary of 9/11, the 47th school shooting was yesterday, in conjunction with the tragedy in Utah. Um, it's been tough. It's been a tough 24, 26, 27 hours. I stayed off social media today. Um, Watched some news clips or whatever while I was on the exercise bike just to stay informed. But like I said, almost didn't do the show tonight. But this is important. It's based on a true story, the needs of historical fiction. Um, but really, every story we tell is based in some part on a true story, on our shared humanity, who we are as people navigating in very difficult times, not unprecedented times by any means, times that look chillingly familiar to some of the darkest times in world history. um, 30 years ago, when I embarked, 35, wow, crazy. 35 years ago, when I embarked on my professional career as a creative, as a writer, as an actor, director, storyteller, so on and so forth, um, I started almost immediately with true stories. And that has become, in many ways, my thing. So, as a Chautauquan, doing one man historical characters, that's a big part of my life, my work, my income, my reputation. Um, and writing screenplays and plays and escape rooms and novels, all kinds of things based in part on a true story, based in part on a true story. What does that even mean? So that's kind of what I'm going to unpack tonight for those of you who are interested in the mechanisms of true story as a creative writer, director, actor, so on and so forth, how you produce these things. I have lots of examples tonight. I've done several blogs on these kinds of things. It is a featured part of my everyday as a story all its own, a triadic approach to the storyteller's craft book, because it's important in one way, shape, or form. Everything that we do is based on a true story, based on an archetype, based on an idea. I just watched the 5 Daniel Craig James Bond movies. So Ian Fleming had a background in intelligence. He no doubt knew James Bond-esque people, people like M, people like Q, and he created amalgams and he heightened and compressed and did all these kinds of things. I'm not. Um, Given the mood of the country and recent events, I'm not even going to roll the opening. I'm just going to kind of go in this. And ironically, it begins with that old tagline, that old log line from Law and Order, ripped from the headlines, all the time. Biopics. Um, Stories about tragedies of different kinds, big mega events, whether during times of war or peace, um, are these true stories. And it's very riveting. It's interesting the challenges that come up with them. I think of Apollo 11, where we know the ending, Titanic, where we know the ending. So what do we do as writers when we're based on a true story? We come up with characters, and we don't know those characters' journeys, and that's what's compelling. That's why we watch. In Apollo 11, yeah, it's Jim Lovell and the rest of his crew, so there aren't made up characters there. Gene in the control room, played so well by Ed Harris, so on and so forth. But we don't know the minutia. Most of us don't know that. We didn't know that. Kevin Bacon, where he has the little piece of paper because he didn't want to hit the eject button. Those things really resonate with us as audience members. So ripped from the headlines, it immediately gets our attention. True stories somehow have value added, is what I'm saying, because they're true stories. Excited for Stephen Knight's new piece, House of Guinness, that's going to drop on Netflix, I think, in about a week and a half or so, 2 weeks, something like that, because we get to play the game of voyeurism. Jim Morrison of The Doors, who was a poet and actually a deep thinker and a philosopher, and a lot of that comes out in the lyrics to his songs, wrote a lot about the condition of the voyeur. That's what it is. We learn early on as creatives, as writers, that the audience must have a willing suspension of disbelief. The entry, the doorway into that willing suspension of disbelief is this idea to be a fly on the wall, the voyeurism. That's why in the other part of my life where I do highly immersive stuff, where the audience actually is in it, they're not voyeurs at all. They're not a fly on the wall. They are the ones that the voyeurs, that the flies would be watching, the game master and anybody else watching on the cameras and all of that is watching, which is very, very interesting. Again, based on a true story. All stories should have a kernel of truth. That is the humanity of them, after all, right? So Mamet tells us, as I've talked about in other of these creative communications, that every story is a move from a lie to a truth. And that's really what we're witnessing through the events of the last 27 hours. People are making their way from lies, uncertainties, assumptions. The two men that were detained, the elderly gentleman who goes to a lot of protests and likes to make a lot of noise, and he was the one that they immediately put up, that we saw, obviously was not the shooter. The shooter is still at large and decades younger than that man. The move from the lie to the truth. Hopefully we will get there, right? The Warren Commission tried to move from a lie to a truth. The Nuremberg trials, in a lot of ways, tried to move from a lie to a truth. So, of course, the gap is so narrow here based on a true story. Narrative storytelling, because of its specific needs, and I'm going to go into that, the technical part of this now, barely resembles the source material. And people get really upset about that. And I'll give you very specific examples of people who have gotten upset the way real people were portrayed, and the steps that other people take to make sure that other people will not be misrepresented. But truth, and boy, are we living in that right now in real time. Truth is a slippery slope because of perception, because of ideology, because of bias, because of echo chamber, because of ideology, theology, flaws in human memory. We don't remember things particularly well after a certain amount of time, and under certain conditions, we don't remember them very well from the get-go, or our mind conflates things. We become confused. There's also the self-protective ego mechanisms that go along, the psychological aspects that we need to understand as storytellers, as creatives. There's an old adage, an old maxim that I really like and quote quite a bit when people are getting sticky about, hey, what the hell actually happened on such and such a day at such and such a time with these people gathered here. There are three sides to every story: yours, mine, and the truth. So please keep that. We're working towards the truth. That's the good work of storytellers. That's why every day is a story all its own. Oh, sorry, this is the new novel. That's for later. Every day is a story all its own is so important. What I like, and there was a film called Winchester about the Winchester House, which was really mythology, horror, but they said inspired by actual events. I love that. Inspired. That gives us a lot of room. That story was my inspiration, and inspiration just went in a total other direction. What we don't want to do ever, and people do it. They're doing it now with the new Conjuring movie, and they've done it with other movies. And it's always fascinating to me. Don't ever be mistake based on a true story for a documentary. Even documentaries suffer from flawed memories, from the biases of the people that are interviewed, from the biases of people who make them. But a documentary, we have a certain expectation of truth. Don't have that expectation. If you're watching a movie that's based on a true story, inspired by actual events, go for that ride, that journey. Ryan Murphy and Ian Brennan, who do the Monster series. They've done some other things that I'm going to talk about tonight. They really do that. This is not a documentary, folks. We are not documentarians. We are storytellers. We are dramatic, edgy storytellers, and that's what they tell. And that's what we have to keep in mind. All of the same structural models that I talk about all the time still apply, but real life doesn't conform to those rules. David Lynch, the great genius who passed away fairly recently, David Lynch said, I don't understand why people say that stories have to make sense. Life does not. But stories do, because audiences have certain expectation. I mean, there's avant-garde things, there's open endings, such as Inception, right? Christopher Nolan's piece, which drove people crazy. How about Sopranos with that ending, just a fade to black? People thought their cable was out. They thought their TVs were broken. But by and large, people crave closure. Some people are rabid about it. They go nuts if they don't get closure in a story. But real life doesn't hold to the rules. So what can we do? When I'm talking about based on a true story, I'm basically talking about historical fiction. So if we said that, if we had fiction right in the name and just said it's historical fiction, okay, folks, what you're about to watch is historical fiction, then they know because it's right in the title. And like I said, I've written so much of this stuff. My latest novel, newest novel, which just came out and still really hasn't been advertised very much because it debuts officially at the Mothman Festival a week from this coming Saturday in Point Pleasant, West Virginia. I'm going to be speaking about my creative journey with the true stories of Point Pleasant and the paranormal and all of those kinds of things. This book looks at the events of 66, 67, but also fictionalizes Tanya and I's life, which was very, very interesting. So there's two characters who are us. And I've never done that before. So an interesting journey. So there, Mothman was here, available on Amazon, selling well with no advertising. So I'm excited because Mothman sells. It's a fascination. This is also the 10th book in my Stanton Chronicles, where I've covered Victorian and Edwardian England, the golden age of piracy in the early part of the 1700s. And we'll go on, if I live long enough and I have the time and the privilege, to cover the American Revolution, the American Civil War, World War I, World War II. So all of those kinds of things. So I want to talk from an actor's point of view. I've been very lucky to have a series of actors on this show, and those are some of my favorite episodes. And actors, of course, some of my favorite people. Being an actor, being a director, being a writer who writes for actors. Philip Seymour Hoffman and Sam Rockwell, who respectively played Truman Capote and Chuck Barris. When they were asked about playing these real people, they were very quick to lay something out, which is very important, which we can keep in mind when looking at this idea of inspired by true events, based on a true story, historical fiction. They were not playing Truman Capote and Chuck Barris. Also, Tom Hollander did a phenomenal in Truman Swans. Speaking of Ryan Murphy and Ian Brennan in Truman Swans, he was beautiful, but he wasn't playing Truman Capote. He was playing an actor's interpretation of a writer's interpretation of the person in question. So it's a series of iterations. As a writer, I know if I just take true story and put it exactly on the page, it doesn't work. So let's talk about why. As writers, we need to heighten and compress all the time. Now, your basic action movies like Mission Impossible, Bourne, the Bourne series, and the James Bond movies. When you look at the modern versions of all of those, they're almost indistinguishable. Locations, action, the more the lead actor actually does the action, the better for everyone. There's a realism there. I just watched before I'm doing the show tonight, I was watching stories about conducting the scenes and these great interviews with the stunt coordinators, stuntmen, all of that. And the more the actor can do it, and they can have those close-ups of crazy things going on. And Cruise has made himself famous for the nutty stuff he does, but it works. It lends this authenticity to the world, rather than having to shoot from far away or from a certain angle or play other illusionary games to make a stunt person look like the actors. So we want to heighten and compress. That's what's going on. They're relentless. It's a nonstop thrill ride, is what people, reviewers, are talking about when they talk about heightening and compressing. So when we take David Mamet's 3-act structure, we take the 3 uses of the knife, it's a continual heightening and compressing. It's about maintaining tension. We let off a little, we come down a little. The 5th Bond movie with Daniel Craig, No Time to Die, was very interesting because it was by and large a genuine love story, which that isn't really Bond's thing at all. So that was interesting. It was a different change of place, and it wasn't heightened and compressed. It was actually pretty languid. It's some of the most beautiful music that Hans Zimmer has ever written. I was listening to his compositions for that this morning after watching the film last night. We have about 120 minutes to tell a story, about 2 hours to tell a story on the page or on the stage. And when we start to get beyond 2 hours, most pieces suffer for it. I mean, some of those Bond movies were 2.5 hours, 2 hours and 43 minutes. Too long. Could have been done in 2:10, 2:15, and I think it would have been better. But if they want to let off the gas a little of that DB5 Aston Martin, that's the way to do it, and let things become a little more languid. And those slower paces of Bond in crisis or seducing a lady, something like that, they slow that down, and that takes a little more time. So what is this about? Like I said, it's really about tension. What are we heightening? Well, we're heightening the drama by heightening the stakes. Things have to be really important. For something like a Bond movie, it's easy because it's life and death. It's life and death. It's Bond and some technology and his wits and his physical strength and agility, and maybe some sidekicks. Same thing with Ethan Hunt in the Mission Impossible stories with the team. But the stakes are life and death. That makes it easy. Ticking time bomb is the core of what we do with thrillers. I always use the ticking time bomb mentality, even if there isn't a bomb in all of my escape rooms. Adversaries and obstacles. So the adversaries have to be a Blofeld. They have to be like a Javier Bardem character where they just have access to people and technology and news and information. One thing that those Bond movies do really well after Casino Royale, it starts with the second one where it really kind of picks up. And I like Quantum of Solace. It's a weird name based on something that's said in an Ian Fleming novel. It's a weird title. But I like it because they're talking about information as commodity. And of course, that's very much the world that we live in now, which puts the Silicon Valley guys right at the forefront, and plenty of overlaps, as I've done in past shows under the different brands that I do for the podcast. The fact that they are hand in glove with the intelligence agencies. So again, it's sort of based on a true story, but it's also very mythological, and that's really the key for most fantastical stories. They are in base of some truth, but they get so fantastical that they become mythological. And that's really the difference there. You want to heighten those things, but you also want to compress events. So you don't want a gunfight, and then 45 minutes later you have a gunfight, and then 30 minutes later you have a car chase. You want these things. You want the characters constantly in the weeds. It's something that Taylor Sheridan does very well. He did it to almost an absurd degree with Yellowstone the first season. I remember turning to Tanya and saying, man, these characters are just in the weeds constantly. It is just obstacle from obstacle, adversary to adversary. Peaky Blinders did that very well. Stephen Knight did that very well. One of my favorite shows of all times, of course, Game of Thrones was very much like that. Deadwood was like that. I'm thinking of shows that I really, really love, long form narrative, some of my favorites. So when I'm teaching this, to give people a visual, think of a toothpaste tube. You hold a toothpaste tube and you compress. And what happens? You hold it this way. You heard it vertically, and you compress it, and the toothpaste comes shooting out of the top. And that's basically heightening and compressing. The compression will allow you, because there's a relentlessness there, and the audience is having a hard time catching their break and slowing down, and their heart rate is kind up. So how do we do this? One of the things that we do, and again, people who become sticklers and go, that didn't happen, and that character didn't come until 10 years later, and blah 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 blah, confusing based on a true story with documentary, is that we combine repetitive occurrences. We combine characters. So when you're doing based on a true story inspired by true events, you're making a lot of amalgams. And oftentimes you will take a character who's an actual historical character, but they will be an amalgam. And sometimes that gets the writer in trouble as far as public opinion. And I'll give you some examples of that as we go. Many of the tension points for us in life happen day in, day out. You're in a bad marriage, you go to a school you don't like, you go to a job you don't like, you have a commute that's horrific in a congested area with tons of traffic, and the frustrations there happen over and over. Now, we can do that to show that, and when a character breaks, we can do that through montage. So we see little clips of them making this commute every day till finally they wig out. I think the movie, one of the scariest movies that I've ever watched, and not in the horror sense, but real life, is Falling Down with Michael Douglas, right? Defends. And we just watch the repetition till he can't do it anymore, and he snaps. And it's absolutely frightening, because how many people do we know, and how many times have we been there doing that same old repetition over and over and over again? So disagreements, lover spats, the traffic, like I said, they rarely accumulate to big blowups and screen-worthy conflicts. So again, you want to compress in order to heighten. Think of that toothpaste tube. So don't show 12 equal arguments. Uh, Build some early tension, show some smaller arguments. You might want to start by showing the culminating argument in a flashback. Start with that and then show the build as to how it happened. See, all of the art, all the techniques, all the literary and cinematic devices are still there at our disposal in based on a true story, and they help us tell the story. They're just as important as in completely fictional, fanciful things. So that's more heightening and compressing. Really figure out, okay, what is the seminal thing? What is going on here? And then you can back and implant the little tensions that lead to that big thing. And you can do that creatively, because as Robert McKee, one of the great teachers of screenwriting, said, action is character. William Goldman, one of the great screenwriters, says that as well. It's show, don't tell. And yes, of course, that's super important in cinema, which is so visual, but really a novel that is only telling, super psychological with a minimum of action, can be a real drudge. And the voice of the author is coming in way too strong. A very close colleague of mine and I were talking about it, that it happens a lot in New York Times bestsellers, these psychological urban, they're not even thrillers, but there's a lot of tell, and the author's sort of zeitgeist, their worldview, that they went to graduate school to learn how to tell that particular thing. That's their oeuvre. That's their thing. That's their jam. Um, can be difficult. So show, don't tell. Intense circumstances. That's how you show a character. In intense circumstances, they have to act. When they're not up to it, we know. If it's too easy on them and they're not pushing themselves, we know, and that's deadly. So again, heighten and compress. Make the obstacles really important. Make the adversaries very, very important. Again, you're going to bring in your rivals. You're going to be, the person who think about, if you don't know this movie, you should watch it. It's really kind of cool. It's dated stylistically in some ways to the 90s, but Wolf with Michelle Pfeiffer, Jack Nicholson, and James Spader, and is about who's going to get that job, and the wolf becomes the analog for that sort of corporate competition. So rivals aren't necessarily villains. They can become, but they're great tensions. Rivals for affection, so a lover's triangle. Yeah, things of that nature. Obstacles drive and challenge the hero. That's where the fundamentals of Joseph Campbell's hero's journey really come and apply. We can really look at that and say, okay, during the initiation, when they've left the ordinary world, we have to have allies for them to counteract and help them with the evil people. So that's why even someone as solitary as Bond, who's much more solitary than Ethan Hunt, I think, in Mission Impossible, Bond has to have a team, and it's kind of begrudging, but he brings them in, whereas Ethan sort of has his team. And then, of course, if you're looking at comic book movies, right, you have the League, the Justice League, and you have the Avengers, because the villains are so outsized and cosmic and all powerful that you have to have that kind of thing. And then the obstacles, the challenges, all of that. Same thing too in comic book movies. Heighten and compress. It's go, go, go. Got to keep them in the weeds all the time, and that's that heart-stopping thrill ride. But characters must still have an arc. I think some well-known filmmakers who you know who they are, so I'm not going to mention the names, who have high criticisms of comic book movies, is because comic book characters tend not to have an arc. I absolutely love Batman. I love and he's not a superhero to me anyway. He's a guy with cool costumes, tech, and gadgets. He's not a superhero, and that's what makes him interesting to me. He's a very, very human, very, very complicated dude. But I also like Tony Stark for the same reason. Tony Stark, Iron Man and Batman are in a lot of ways interchangeable, and I like that kind of thing. But there has to be an arc. There has to be some kind of learning curve, and a lot of times that suffers. I think reading between the lines, watching interviews with Val Kilmer, why Batman was so satisfying to him was because of that lack of an arc. I think Chris Nolan did a good job in putting in an arc for Christian Bale, who was very much up to the task and probably wouldn't have done the character otherwise. Something that interests me right now, speaking of someone like Batman or Tony Stark, who are these flawed men, a major part of character arc is redemption. And we see this a lot in true stories. Someone who has just failed, who has made mistakes, who is down on their luck, but then comes roaring back. And that could be a sports team. And people love these things. The broken man anti-hero at 56 years old, and just the world that we're living in, and politics and how that's interlocking and changing story, and who gets opportunities to tell stories, and how are stories told, and what are their component pieces, and all of that. And everybody is talking that from South Park to just watching these these long form narratives that are wonderful. Some that I've really enjoyed recently was Untamed, of Department Q. I was thinking about it. James Bond is the ultimate broken anti-hero. He's certainly anti-establishment. We like to see him as a hero because he's anti-establishment, but certainly his coworkers, his supervisors, rival agencies don't see him as a hero. Many times, like Blofeld doesn't see him as a hero at all. He's the guy who took away his father from him, and so he goes on a rampant um, uh, revenge arc. So revenge arcs and redemption arcs often work very well together. It drives the hero, it heightens and compresses. But that's a major part. If you're going to do based on a true story, look for characters who need some redemption, who are anti-heroes, who in that great classic Greek sense of the word are highly flawed characters. Now that becomes interesting and kind of again, I'm not going to name names. There was one very famous instance of this, and when the actual movie came out, that was very much to me pandering. I just haven't watched it, and people say, "How the heck can you not watch that?" Well, I'm just not going to watch it. But it was a biopic. It was about someone who's very flawed, and their humanity, I believe, was intimately tied to their flawness, and it made it not a redemption arc because it's not like they did anything wrong, um, but made that journey so compelling that this very complex person did what they did and achieved what they did, but the families were so protective, colleagues were so protective that what came out was a highly sanitized version. Um, that really makes telling compelling stories next to impossible. So when people soft pedal and just want to make a biopic where the person is glowing and kind of flawless and things came easier to them and they didn't take the losses, um, it's not compelling. You don't feel like it's compelling at all, at all. And that's why. Hey, Ma. Good evening to you. So, how about some of those criticisms that came out? So, Art Howe, who is the former manager of the Oakland A's, took big offense to the portrayal of him in Moneyball, ironically by Philip Seymour Hoffman. Philip Seymour Hoffman, who said, "Hey, look, when I played Truman Capote, I wasn't playing Truman Capote. Um, I was playing an interpretation, an iteration that came from the writer, the director, the producers, audience desires and needs." So that was interesting that Art Howe portrayed that, or was annoyed at that portrayal. Olivia de Havilland went so far as to sue the writers, producers of Feud about Betty Davis and Joan Crawford for lying about what she said and did in that constellation of people. But again, this is Ryan Murphy, this is Ian Brennan. They're gonna push it. They're making drama. They're entertainers. They're not documentarians. Menendez Dahmer and Dahmer are super compelling and shine a light in a lot of ways. I mean, when Menendez came out, right, those two guys almost got out of prison. It didn't work out. But and now I think it's November or December. I just watched Charlie Hunnam is gonna do Ed Gain. Um so and again, it's not a documentary. So when you watch the documentary, things are a lot different. The character that Nathan Lane portrayed, they took a lot of liberties with that character. They took a different character in Truman Swan, a guy who we never met and didn't get along with, and gave a whole sort of redemption, let's come together, kumbaya episode. But there you go. We're heightening, we're compressing, we're taking liberties all the time. And for the rest of it, I'm going to talk about that. But the family of Commander Deniston, who's in the Imitation Game, right, is about Alan Turing, played by Charles Dance. Another tremendous actor, was very upset at the portrayal because Deniston is relentlessly driving Alan Turing to break the code, to get it done, to get the technology online, to get it together. In truth, he didn't do any of those things, but some character had to. So that becomes an amalgam. I mean, if he was commander and the stakes were that high and the Germans were wreaking havoc and time was of the essence, you're already heightened and compressed. Somebody has to stand in for that. So rather than having 5 or 6 characters and it's very diffuse, you concentrate it in one character. It becomes unfortunate for the family. It becomes unfortunate in some ways for history, but we can always go back to the history and find the facts. I'm going to talk about that in a little bit as far as the imitation game. If you're really serious about doing based on a true story work, I have a homework assignment for you, and it's going to take you a lot of time, and but it's going to be worth it, and it's going to help you up your game like it helped me up my game. But another thing that we have to do, I'm going to do an episode on the gap. The gap is storytelling told gold. There's two different kinds of gaps. There's for a character, there's where they are and where they want to be, and that's life. That's where our goals, our ambitions come from. That's where our motivations come from to make more money, to find true love, get in a better situation, get a better car, move to a better neighborhood, um, all those kinds of things, achieve our dreams as creatives. There's a gap, and we're trying to close that gap. And that's what's happening in those instances. That is key for historical fiction. That's where we really make our money, in those gaps. And then that's the reward for telling true stories, is those gaps. So there you go. So if there's a period in the person's life that's unknown, that's a rich kind of gap area for telling true stories. The most famous, and going back the longest amount of time, is Jesus, right? What happened in those 18 years between when he's 12 and he has the wig out at the temple lecturing and kind of disappears, and then he reemerges at 30, not wig out and disappears. He's talking to the rabbis and so on and so forth at the temple at 12 years old, and everybody's absolutely amazed. And then he just kind of goes away. Was he traveling with Joseph of Arimathea? Did he go to India? Did he learn about the Buddha? And that's where that kind of flavor in his ministry in those last 3 years of his life came. That is a rich place. It's also a little fraud. So people, there are a lot of books and all, but there aren't too many stories about what happened to Jesus, in cinema and TV in those lost years of his life. Cause it's just so fraught, which is a shame because it's a very, very rich area. One of the first escape rooms that I designed, one of the pirates that it centered on, Charles Vane, from the time that he was arrested in 1718 till the time that he was hung in 1719, nobody knows why they kept him in prison. Usually with pirates, especially with a very well-known notorious pirate like Vane, you would be tried and then you would be hung immediately. That was an important part of all of it, that kind of ruthless justice, very quick, very, very kind of expedient. So I created the whole escape room about what he was up to for that whole year, and then it's going to be a part of the sixth pirate novel, sixth and seventh pirate novels. It'll really get into what he did from my own estimation, and it's not historically accurate. And because people don't know, I can take a lot of liberties in that. Whereas those pirate books and my pirate show, well, especially the pirate show, the performances all are just about 100% accurate and based on now 8 years of intensive research and inhabiting the suit and being on replica pirate ships and talking to sailors and doing all that kind of stuff. Another good example of the gap where you can take a lot of liberty, but it's also mythology. This becomes mythology, and it's Vice, that Adam McKay piece, which was his brilliant follow-up to The Big Short. Highly stylized storytelling fills in the gaps in the otherwise secretive life of Dick Cheney. So when he was off doing stuff and we didn't know what he was doing or what was going on behind that closed door, as a writer, we are invited we've immersed enough in the truth of the story that we can, when Agatha Christie disappeared for a short period, people have gone way off the res with that. And then I've read fairly mundane. She was angry with her husband. He was up to no good. So she was teaching him a lesson, but that actual gap is awesome. So let's see here. So The Terror, Dan Simmons book. It's this expedition up into the cap, the polar snow caps. There have been lots of these expeditions and all, but he fills the gaps of what might have went on with this these people who disappeared off the ship and were gone with the paranormal. And you could do that with the Andrea Deering. Another one just occurred to me. Croton, the Lost Colony of Roanoke. What happened? People have gone. Is Stephen King with Storm of the Century tied in a whole big, huge mythology around that? But that is a gap. What happened? We don't know. So, let's see here. Drood. If you haven't read Dan Simmons' Drood, it's a really big book, but it's awesome. And it is about the gaps at the end of his life. And it's absolutely brilliant. And Edward Drood, which he never finished, it takes that name Drood, but Wilkie Collins is in it and his sidekick, and there's opium dens and shadowy characters, all kinds of really interesting stuff. Again, you're taking liberties that are moving to the level of mythology, and that's fine. Now, another thing that's in the news right now, and it's another bit of a hot button, is the Conjuring films, and that's won the last rights, and who was involved, and it was about this person, but they really didn't talk to this person, and who were the Warren. The Warrens are going through a revision, I think rightfully so, about what was real and what was fiction, and what were those people made of, especially Ed. And I think that's right. I have been talking about that stuff in my life as a paranormal investigator for a really long time. We did an episode of Sinister Mysteries about Amityville. It's gotten a lot of views, and I'm really not shy, because a lot of damage was done and a lot of information, a lot of people come out, all of those kinds of things. So this to me is interesting. It is ironic because, that's not based on what really happened, but nobody knows what really happened because these people were, to a certain extent, frauds, exaggerators, took advantage of people in situations to make money, things like that. And a lot of people have come forward about Ed Warren and all of that. And Blumhouse, of course, they're telling these big, fantastical, mythological horror stories. So again, I get really, really confused when people are getting so up in arms. It is not a documentary. So just go enjoy the ride. Forget it's the Warrens. Forget that they're based on real people. And if that's not your cup of tea, just don't watch it. So yeah, they the Conjuring movies definitely are up and down. But I like Patrick Wilson. I like Via Farmiga. So so I watch them for that. They have some good supporting cast members, but never get confused that I'm watching a documentary for a minute. At times, as writers, we take really, really, really big liberties. So I'm going to take liberties with Charles Vane. And the example I have for you of this is Peter Morgan, episode 109 of The Crown. And Peter Morgan is right up there with Stephen Knight. Just brilliant British long form storyteller. Just solid stuff from these guys. It's one of the best episodes ever. So you have Stephen Delane as the portrait painter Graham Sutherland. You have John Lithgow, who's just so very good as Churchill. I love Gary Oldman's Churchill in Darkest Hour, but man, John Lithgow was awesome as Churchill. And it's Churchill was a painter. He's sitting for this portrait. It's an opportunity for them to have these long conversations. It was very, very wonderful. Well, Mrs. Churchill absolutely despised the painting that was done. She didn't think it was a good, accurate portrait of him or whatever. She had a maid hide it. In the TV show, people got really, really upset because they had the maid burn it. It's much more powerful. It's much more visual. It comes to a little bit of the mythological, but you're talking about somebody who's larger than life anyway, Churchill. There's a mythology there anyway, and it really, really worked. And at the end of the day, I think that's that, and we could always go find out what really happened. Um, I think to go through the whole thing where this conspiracy and, oh, take it up to the attic and cover it over and hide it, and then the camera's gonna pan back like it's the end of Indiana Jones, where they're in the warehouse where there's all these kinds of things like the Ark. It's just too much, and it's gonna break the back of a story. All of the very best stories are structurally delicate because the writer, the director, everyone is pushing it. It's minimalist even when it's epic because you're heightening and you're compressing. So it's got to move quickly. It's got to be pretty surface. Um, and that it just would have collapsed the structure to go through all of that. It would have made the fifth act um just a bore. So I totally got it. Other examples where at a certain point it really becomes myth is Oliver Stone's The Doors. A lot of people were upset about that. So read Danny Sugarman's book. Read biographies by Ray Manzarek and John Densmore. Read Morrison stuff, and then put it all together and figure it out. But it's absolutely mythological, and it's pretty wonderful for that. I've written a blog article a number of years ago on The Greatest Showman, which I just happen to love. I just love it. And Barnum was not a great guy. He was very exploitative, just like Ed Warren in his world, exploiting the people around them for his own gain, monetary fame, all of that kind of stuff. But if you look at it as a mythological event, I mean, it is a musical, but it does have a good character redemption arc. It's another example of the broken, flawed man who redeems himself, and there is value in some of that kind of stuff, but we have to remember, hey, this is a mythology. Somebody should do a piece on P.T. Barnum. Stephen Knight could do it and do it really well, and sort of the viciousness and opportunism that went, the exploitation that went with all of that kind of stuff. Ironically, American Horror Story, again, Ian Brennan and Ryan Murphy. And they did an American Horror Story where it was a freak show. It might have been called Freak Show, but humanized it and really looked at what was going on there and the politics and all of it. It's why I love The Elephant Man, based on a true story. The film, the David Lynch film, the play, which is so excellent, and David Bowie did a version of the play, no makeup, no nothing, just body contortion. Absolutely breathtaking stuff. Rob Roy with Liam Neeson, so my Scottish pirate character, Angus McGregor, he's the nephew of Rob Roy. So in order to build that character and sustain him and grow him over 8 years, I've done continuous reading of Rob Roy. Well, if you watch Rob Roy, it's a great film. It gets a ton of stuff absolutely wrong, but it heightens, it compresses, it amalgamates characters, it changes timelines, all to great effect, just like Walter Scott's novel of Rob Roy. Not historical. Not, this isn't David McCullough doing Pulitzer Prize winning John Adams. That's not what's going on here. So to really get an idea of this, I said, if you're really serious about it and all, I'll give you some homework. Read the book, A Beautiful Mind, very thick. Read the book, The Imitation Game, about Alan Turing, not as thick. Then watch the films. Then do more research and see. The true story of John Forbes Nash could not be have shown on the screen. It would have been a completely different movie about a completely different thing because of some of his the way that he was led him to do some things that just would have been inappropriate. So I totally get it. But go ahead and track the iterations, see where it's heightened, see where it's compressed, see where characters are amalgamations, and then go from there. And the last thing I want to talk about kind of takes us full circle, because no historical persons or events should be looked at through the lens of modern morals. It defeats the purpose. It's a moment in time. It has cultural and social context. We can, in some ways, celebrate how far humanity has come. In some ways, we should be ashamed how humanity has not progressed very much, and technology, rather than elevating society, has actually brought it backwards. In recent events and the time that we spent at home for a long period of time feels like we went back to the 60s. And I'm reading a very, very good book by Eric Lawson called In the Garden of the Beasts about 1933 Berlin, and the similarities are shocking. So that's going back almost 100 years. We're 8 years shy of a century ago that the Nazis came to power in Germany in 1933. Is a very, very difficult read, but I think also essential. So be really, really careful to go, oh, those people, they just didn't know. And oh, weren't they? And, all the history revision and stuff that's going on, monuments being pulled and all of that. It's sometimes very, very helpful to talk about what was going on. And the so for the Civil War, for instance, I've done a lot of Civil War characters, written quite about the Civil War as a scholar, and presented. And yes, we know what was going on with the South, but when the North decided to start the colored troops, so the 54th Massachusetts, so on and so forth, I play a character, portray a captain in the 54th Massachusetts, Louis Emilio, forward 54th. Where they were used as fodder in the assault on Fort Wagner. Well, several things happen with African American troops in the North. For instance, they had to be put on trains in the middle of the night to be taken out when they enlisted. There were riots in Boston and New York and other cities in protest of this. White officers refused to serve with African American soldiers. These are the kind of things where, if we're just going, oh, we know exactly what's going on, and we know who the good guys are, and we know who the bad guys are, and it's this simple, A and B, we're missing out. So be really careful. Modern elitism sounds like this: oh, those horrible, ignorant dolts. We treat people so much better now, with so much more understanding, with so much more compassion. Do we? I don't know. Current events are not speaking to that. So when we get into the morals, we're skewing the lens. Just tell the story. I'm going to be doing an episode in the coming weeks of theme and character and how they link. And again, I was talking to a colleague earlier today. I told you we were talking about New York bestsellers and how a lot of them fall short. They're very limited, very cynical worldview, which isn't particularly helpful and reinforces a lot of misunderstandings, and people don't grow. If you have characters that express every angle of the theme, then they can just tell the story. They can just interact. All points of view are represented, and then you can sort out. It takes away the echo chamber effect. And people come, there were so many people who refused to come see my portrayal of Che Guevara because that modern morality elitism came in, and that was a real shame, because he was a very complex individual. And sometimes when we understand people's motivations, we can be a little more empathetic, right? And it's amazing to me that the word empathy has come under fire, and there were very few. There are a few people who have specifically attacked empathy like it's somehow some kind of deficit. I can't understand in any way how trying to understand where someone's come from, how their upbringing, their economic situation, their social situation, their political situation, their theological situation has shaped them and brought them to who they are. That is what empathy is. There isn't a downside to that. You don't have to agree with them, but understanding them is a path towards cooperation. Uh, yeah, just something to think about there. Present the facts, present the dilemmas, present by all means, present the mistakes. I portrayed Che as a highly flawed person because he was. Um, and talked about those flaws and dilemmas and mistakes. Let the audience make their own judgment, but that if they come away and go, if I had taken a right instead of a left, there before the grace of God go I. If my country had XYZ, if my family was too poor so my family couldn't get the medical care that it needed, so there was a prejudice and elitistness there that went to medicine, and that's why this person became a doctor, but they also became a revolutionary. That's just a good thing that would help. The tragedy that we're remembering today from 24 years ago, there was such a rush to judgment and branding of a capital E evil, and the people who stopped to say, why did this happen? What does this look like? What are the political, social, ideological, economic factors that go into a mindset that leads somebody to do something? They were absolutely villainized, and I'm seeing people villainized today. So thank you. This was, anybody who knows me and has been following my journey. Through this podcast and all the work that I do and the lectures and presentations and workshops and all, know that this is the value of story to me, to talk about all of these kinds of things. Yes, mind maps, MA, are absolutely awesome for building a novel. I do that. I use index cards. I use mind maps. But basically, Harold Clurman, the director of the group theater and a brilliant director. I've learned so much from his work, turned it into a wagon wheel. So just briefly, it's a little teaser for the episode that I do on character and theme. You have a character continuum. So Star Wars is really good. You got Yoda on one end and you got the Emperor on the other end, right? These are the absolute extremes. No people are actually like them. They are ideas. They are archetypes more than they are. Also a problem in our political spectrum. The further you move in either direction, the less it speaks to what most people are, and yet it's so loud and so oversized that it dominates things. Anyway, and then you have Luke in the middle. He can get pulled toward the dark side. He can get pulled toward the hero. In terms of Dungeons and Dragons, you have a character who's vague. I'm missing their morals are that's Han Solo, right? That's sort of the cowboy who can be good or evil depending on, never evil, but their morals could be questionable. They could leave you in a lurch, but then they can show up. Come on, kid, let's blow this thing and go home. Their own little mini redemption arc, right? Oh, I'm not helping the Rebel Alliance. That's not my fight. I'm just a smuggler. But then they show up. They think better of it. So that's really, really cool stuff. And then you take the theme, and that's the hub. And you take all those characters, you put them in a circle, and then the spokes are how each one of those characters attaches to the theme. So that is very, very much a mind map, and that is excellent for character develop. Yeah. So, all right. Thank you all, folks. It's just shy of an hour. Next week, I'm going to do a replay on Thursday night having to do with Point Pleasant, the Mothman, and all that kind of stuff, because Tanya and I will be getting ready to go to Point Pleasant on Friday. Very excited. Bill and Jackie Kuselis have been on Into the Outer Realms twice. We're going to see a lecture that they're doing Friday night in Gallipolis, Ohio. We have a long drive, about 4.5 hours to get there. Saturday and Sunday are going to be very long days. I'm going to be talking, hopefully selling lots of books. Tanya's going to be selling her retro cryptid artwork. So we need to get ready for that. Emma, thank you. And thank you for all of your comments and for joining the show live tonight. I know you always you tend to watch them after the fact. So there you go. So thank you very much. We'll be back. Then we're going to have Karen Lutz come back for take 2. Hopefully her technology's sorted out. She has a good, strong internet connection. She's been winning all kinds of awards for her short film. Really excited to have her back. She'll update us on her basketball documentary. So everybody be well, stay safe, practice empathy, and try to see all sides of the story. Because it makes us better human beings. And again, it's not about agreeing or disagreeing. It's about understanding, and that helps. So thank you all. Thank you for listening. Thank you for supporting. Be well. Writers, directors, storytellers, people in the industry are loving this book. They're recommending it to other people. I know a lot of writers who are reading it, and it's really helping them with their work. So I'm not embarrassed or bashful at all to recommend this every day as a story all its own. So thank you all, and I'll see you soon.